Yemenis are pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli. But I'm not at all sure that the Iranians were totally enthusiastic about the Houthi actions against Gaza. That there's a very distinct split between the Saudis and the Emiratis. And that to some extent this rivalry between the two, it plays out most visibly in Yemen. The Israelis don't have any deep interest in Yemen.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash the subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. We rely on you. Also, please check our Substack where we bring out long format analysis of events around the world. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest today, Helen Lackner. Ms. Lackner, we are honored to be joined by Ms. Helen Lackner, one of the world's foremost experts on Yemen. She is the author of several books, including Yemen in Crisis, The Road to War, Yemen, Poverty and Conflict, and Yemen in Crisis, Devastating Conflict, Fragile Hope. She has spent several decades working and researching in the country. Her work spans political analysis, rural development, and international policy. Ms. Lackner, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I hope that we'll be able to say something that will make things a bit clearer for listeners.
Yes, absolutely. I have been desperately wanting to talk to you because given Yemen is in the news, and as it's difficult to find people who knows the internal dynamics of Yemen. So we'll come to all the reasons why Yemen is in news. But if we could start with understanding the political divisions within Yemen, because a lot of people have heard about Ansar Allah, they have heard about the Presidential Leadership Council, which itself comprises of many groups, and it's difficult to get a hang of what they mean. And there is also the internationally recognized government operating largely from Riyadh. So can you talk about the emergence of these political divisions in Yemen?
Yeah, I think rather than start with the emergence, I think I'll start with the actual situation as it is today. And actually, it would have been good if we'd got a map for this, but I didn't think to get one ready for the occasion. Basically, if you look at Yemen today, you have two broad areas. You have basically the northwest, up down to about the Taiz, and the west coast down to about 100 kilometers south of Hodeidah, which are under the control of Ansar Allah. Now, Ansar Allah is the official name of what are mostly commonly described as the Houthis in the media, and even more commonly described as the Iran-backed Houthis. But I hope we'll come to that issue later because that's a description which I think is largely incorrect. Now, the Houthi movement or Ansar Allah emerged in the last 30 years. First, in opposition to the central government, when there was only one government in Yemen, up to about 10 years ago. And they are a fundamentally religious movement which has a very strong military element. And I'll just leave it at that for now and come to the rest of the country. Just one more thing. Basically, they control only about 30% of the geographical area of Yemen, but 70% of the population. So in terms of, political control over the population, they are the major element. Now, the rest of the country, which is much larger, but comprises of a lot of desert, is under the control of what is known as the internationally recognized government. Now, this was basically created after the 2011 crisis and initially until 2015 actually was in charge of the whole country. But after the Houthi movement took over this large area, there's been very little change in the control area, the internationally recognized government is controlling basically the east and the very far south of the country. And that is often described as the Houthis have the north and the IRG have the south, which is very misleading because it gives the impression that we have the former borders of the pre-1990 borders of the Yemen Arab Republic under the Houthi area and what was the PDRY, People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, under the IRG. This is simply incorrect because although the Houthi-controlled area is entirely within the area that was within the Yemen Arab Republic, the internationally recognized government controls significant areas which were previously in what was the Yemen Arab Republic. So the equation of South equal IRG is just wrong. And the other element is that the internationally recognized government was led by President Hadi until 2022, from 2012 to 2022. And it was already very fragmented. In 2022, Hadi was basically ousted by the Saudis and the Emiratis and replaced by something called the Presidential Leadership Council. So now, and that Presidential Leadership Council is composed of 8 people, 1 president plus 7 vice presidents. Most of the vice presidents represent armed factions who have control over certain areas. So, for example, the governorate of Maghreb is under the control of one of these people called Sultan al-Arada, and it's one of the main fronts between the internationally recognized government and Ansar Allah. And that is again was part of what was the Yemen Arab Republic. So technically, for those people who talk about the north, it would be in the north. Another area which has certain similarities is the southwest section, which is on the coast with the Bab al-Mandab and covers the Red Sea coast up to about 100 kilometers south of Hodeidah, and goes into parts of Taiz governorate, is under the control of Tariq Saleh, who is another military character and who is the nephew of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. And again, that area was not part of the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen. So, fundamentally, you have these two very different groupings, and one of the fundamental differences you have between them is that Ansar Allah and the Houthi are a very centralized and well-organized area, which is very clearly governed by Ansar Allah. Whether you like that type of governance or not is a different issue. Most people don't like it. It's very autocratic. It's very repressive. It is not the kind of regime any of us would like to live under. But it is run as a government, whereas the other area, which has these 7 vice presidents, many of these vice presidents have their own areas that they support or that they control. I've just mentioned Arada and I've mentioned Tariq Saleh. You also have in the Far East, you have Hadramaut, which doesn't have at the moment, well, it has a member of the peer of one of the vice presidents, but he is not really in control of that governorate. That governorate is very special, and maybe we'll talk about it separately later. You have Aden, which is theoretically the capital of the temporary interim capital of the internationally recognized government, which in practice is under the control of one particular southern separatist group, which is led by one of the vice presidents of the PLC. So when you're talking about the internationally recognized government, you're basically talking about the PLC and the government under a prime minister, which has a number of ministers, which are all theoretically based in Aden, but many of them are not based in Aden. They're based in Riyadh or in other locations. So although this sounds complicated, it would have helped if we had a map, but we don't. So if you can put one in later, that would probably be a good idea. But that, that's the current situation. And as I explained, this started, these divid. If you look at Yemen, the Republic of Yemen was established in 1990 by the unification of what was then the Yemen Arab Republic under Ali Abdullah Saleh and the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, which was the one and only socialist regime in the Arab world. And this was a peaceful unification for which the vast majority of the people were highly enthusiastic, but they were soon disappointed for a whole host of different reasons. I don't know if you want to go into that now. Uh, so basically, the current situation is a very centralized Ansar Allah regime and a highly fragmented internationally recognized government area, which is at best managed at the governorate level. You can say that some of the governorates are reasonably well managed, but which also has, I mean, both sides have very serious financial difficulties, which of course constrain their ability to provide to basically to govern. They choose to use their funds the way they choose to use their funds. So it's not, but basically both sides are suffering very strongly, both for the humanitarian situation and in provision of basic services for the people. I think I'll stop now to give you a chance to talk.
No, that was extremely helpful. I'll come back to some of the balance of power between these fractions, at least the two sides, and that would be also a good way to discuss the civil war and the role of others. But I think I want to ask you a question about, you mentioned that internally Houthis are not the kind of people one would like to live under. In a Jacobin article, I remember, and I'm paraphrasing, you said that even if you said a comparison with the Taliban might not be fully incorrect. So I think the question that comes to my mind when I read that is, if we compare the Houthis with the PRs, the Presidential Leadership Council, it seems that extreme forms of religious political ideas are part of both of them, although in different ways. There are a lot of Salafi influence within the PLC. So, can you talk about how they compare, if how the two sides compare to each other, and what's the nature of repression? Is it religion being used in a political sense in an exclusive way, or does it go into administrative repression and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to assume that to say that the PLC is a religious-based organization. I'll come to that in a minute. But the Houthis they are a theocratic organization. I mean, their ideology is modeled on, to some extent, on the Iranian system. They do not want to cancel the existence of a republic. What they want is to install, and which is what they're running, a system which has a president and a government, but ultimate authority is with the religious leader, who is now Abdul Malik al-Houthi. And so I think the correct term is probably a theocracy. Now, they are authoritarian, and although they have, they actually had they have a formal system which has, a parliament, etc. But they are extremely repressive in the sense that they are repressive in most of the standard ways that fundamentalist religious organizations are repressive. They are particularly, you know, obsessive about the way women dress, about the way people dress, about how, not allowing women, for example, to go out without being supervised or accompanied by a male protector who has to be a relative. They arrest journalists or basically people for expressing opinions that are not conform with their own ideas. And they are very actively promoting their own ideology through the education system, as well as through what the summer camps for young people, and as well as sort of education courses for adults and employees. And there have been cases of torture and people dying in their prisons, which is also the case on the other side. So they're not, the repressive element is not exclusively a Houthi behavior, but it's found on both sides. But the Houthis are probably more extreme about this. And particularly in the last year, they've arrested about 60 people working for international humanitarian organizations under the pretext that they are all spies for the US and the UK. And this is, very unlikely to be the case. And they've had people performing, videoed confessions to somewhat absurd statements. So the repression is really quite strong, and there's very little options for people under their rule to express any different views. Now, when it comes to the PLC and the IRG, yes, there are also fundamentalist elements in there, but they are much more, in a way, they're much more manipulated by the leadership and by external powers than in the case of the Houthis. In the case of the Houthis, I think the fundamentalism is very much part of their own ideology. Whereas I think if you talk about the ideology of the PLC, is that it's particularly notable by its absence. The PL, they are, I mean, of the 8 vice presidents of the PLC, at least one is a Salafi. I think there may be two, I'm not sure. But they're really mostly they use religion in a different way, and that's largely connected also with the role of the United Arab Emirates, because as I'm sure you know, the United Arab Emirates have a complete phobia about any form of political Islamism, whether it's sort of mild or very reasonable or whatever political Islamism to the far extreme of jihadism. They are completely, they regard all of it in a completely unsophisticated manner as being extremely dangerous. So their position is that they support what are known as quietist Salafis, i.e. Salafis who believe in obeying the ruler, whoever the ruler might be, as opposed to potentially challenging the ruler. And therefore, those are the groups that some of the military entities that they support follow that, at least their leaders follow that position. But as an entity, yes, of course, they are Muslims. I mean, there's no question about that. But religion isn't really the fundamental element that guides the internationally recognized government. Though they are strong, I mean, there is the Islah Party, which is a sort of what you could call it is a political Islamist party, and that has an important role within the IRG, but it's not exclusive, and it doesn't have the kind of influence, and you can't say that the IRG or the PLC is dominated by the Islahis. So there's a very fundamental difference there.
I wonder how one would place the Shia-Sunni divide in this equation. Not for now discussing Iran and Saudi Arabia, but internally was the Shia-Sunni story there, because the flat story we hear was that the Houthis rose in the 90s as primarily a youth group led by Jaidi religious movement. So talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean the Houthis are Zaydis. and the Houthi movement is primarily Zaidi. They control areas that are not Zaidi. For example, parts of Maghreb and Tihama and all those areas are not populated by, and some south of Yarim are not populated by Zaidi people. So the rest of Yemen is populated by Sunnis, mainly of the Shafi'i variety. And they are, so there's not a and theologically, as I understand it, there's very little difference between Zaydism and Shafi'i Sunnism. And in the past, and I think up to a point to today, it was generally well known and said, that the Yemenis would pray together in the same mosques, whether they're Sunni or whether they're Zaydi, and that in a sense there was no sectarianism as a behavior on a day-to-day basis was not something which existed in the past. Now, what the Houthis have done is, and on the one hand, and the Salafis on the other, is that they're building up and made every effort to increase those differences and to create a sectarian element to the relation, to the political problems within the country. And I mean, one has to say that, this has now been going on for 15 years or longer, and it clearly is having an impact. So I'm still feel that I can say that sectarianism is not a fundamental division in Yemen, but I feel less confident in saying this as the years go by. Because I think, once you've had enough, a generation or two who've been brought up with this sort of sectarian vision of the world, this has an impact, of course, on society. So that sectarianism is now one of the elements of social fragmentation within Yemen. It's not the only one, and I'd say it probably still isn't the main one, but it is becoming a significant one.
What explains the success of the Houthis? Because if the Zaydis are about 35 to 45% as, and more dominated in the northern part, but they also have, as you said, two-thirds of the population. So obviously others are also under their control. Now, one way to look at it is total repression. But I also wonder, and you have talked about this, but I also wonder, and the other thing is also their military success. If they are concentrated military organized groups, then there would be an element of that as well. But apart from that, is there anything else to look at that can describe the success of the Houthis? Probably unified Yemen, or I don't know. I'm just asking that question to you.
Hmm. Well, I think it's an important question. And, I'm not sure that, I mean, you've given some of the answers, which is that they are a very organized group. When they started, they were opposing the oppression and the neglect from the Saleh regime. Partly, and there were the six wars between 2004 and 2010 between the Saleh regime and the Houthis. And those really became worse and worse over time, not only and strengthened the Houthis, partly because of the nature and quality of the response of the Saleh regime. The Saleh regime dealt with it extremely badly, one has to say, and therefore they facilitated both people in the northern part of the country joining the Houthis simply because they were so dissatisfied with the Saleh regime approach, and therefore strengthening the Houthis. And also, they were, they've managed to recruit more and more people throughout the country because of a wider opposition to the Saleh regime. And I think today, when you look at the situation today, they've had a massive amount of recruitment since their intervention in favor of Gaza and in favor of the Palestinians. I mean, that's been a fantastic boost for their military recruitment. So the military element and their strength they gained, I think, through the experience of the different wars. Another element of their strength is the weakness of their opposition, which is simply that, the IRG is the only time the IRG came together militarily was in 2021, or was it, forget, I think it was 2021 or 2020, so 21 it must have been, when the Houthis were on the point of basically taking Marib and therefore taking the oil producing areas. And at that point, the IRG brought over the Salafi and the Tariq Saleh troops from the southwest, from the Tihama coast, from, in to basically to help the rest of the IRG in order to prevent the Houthis from taking over. And at that point, the Houthis moved 100 kilometers south of Hodeidah simply because the other guys left, so they simply took over. And that was the biggest change in front lines over the whole period of the war. So basically the Houthis they've gained military experience from their own practice over the time, and they have had some support and some technical training and some support, from their allies elsewhere, and that includes Hezbollah and possibly a few Iranians. So there's, but mostly they've developed, they have very considerably improved their capacity over now, the first war started in 2004, so we're talking about 20 years of military activity.
Uh, what's the element of nationalism there? Are the Houthis seen as more nationalist than the leaders of the PLC? Given some people say that there was a point in time before the crisis of 2011, the PLC was seen very close to UAE and Saudis in particular, and Houthis as representing something more nationalists, let's say. Is there any merit to this line of thinking?
Well, not really. I mean, first, before 2011, there was no PLC. The PLC was established in 2022.
Yeah,
So
the Salih's government, basically.
it obviously didn't exist at all. No, I don't think there is generally. I mean, I would say one of the few positive things one could say about Ali Abdullah Saleh is that he was a genuine Yemeni nationalist and believed in the Yemeni nation. Whereas on the other, by contrast, the Houthis are a theocracy, and they regard that their right to rule comes from God, and not particularly, and nowadays sorry. Some of them even consider that they can rule beyond Yemen. So I would say, if you're talking about nationalism, certainly Ali Abdullah Saleh was more of a nationalist than the Houthis are. So
He
and
was he was also the architect of the unification
And
in
he was indeed, and I think that was his greatest claim to greatest success. And even today, you will find people who basically who favor unity, and who will consider that, that's that who still respect Ali Abdullah Saleh precisely because he brought it about. So I think, that's and if you look at the whole of history of Yemen, I mean, yes, you could argue that the current PLC aren't very good nationalists, given that they hang around all over the place. But in terms of believing in Yemen as a state and as a unified culture in the broadest sense, certainly Ali Abdullah Saleh did that. And I'm sure that, you'd say, I mean, for example, you cannot say that the southern separatists are Yemeni nationalists because they although they use the PDRY flag, which causes me some amusement, or if not sarcasm, they can't even decide on the name that they would give to the entity if they manage to go back to the pre-1990 borders. But they clearly don't consider that Sana'a is part of the territory that they're interested in. So I think, if you're talking, I mean, I would hate to try and decide who's the least or most nationalist between the different factions.
Can you talk a little bit about very concisely about the southern separatist movement? Basically, um, what's the pulse of the politics there? Because you began by saying that it's wrong to even look at the former divisions of North and South and try to superimpose them into today's politics. But we did discuss about the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen and the Yemeni Arab Republic earlier when we hosted you. That was a very good discussion. But we never discussed the Southern separatist movement. I know it's a long, huge topic, but very concisely so that people get a comprehensive sense of the divisions.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, they are particularly the way when unification happened in 1990, most of the people who were involved in the process in the Yemeni Socialist Party from the PDRY side had looked forward and hoped that it would be a federal arrangement. And there was what turned out to be really a private secret deal made overnight between Al-Bid, who was then the Secretary General of the YSP, and Ali Abdallah Saleh to have this full unity, which is basically what Saleh wanted. So that created the roots for problems because very, very quickly what had been the PDRY lost many of the advantages that people had there. I mean, including social security, reasonable prices, an accessible cost of living, education, various other facilities provided by the state in the PDRY. So that there was that level of disagreement. On top of that, there was very rapid and instant disagreement between Saleh and Al-Bid, which led to a civil war that lasted 3 months in 1994, which was promptly won by the Saleh regime because he was assisted by many southern forces from previous disagreements within the PDRY, but I won't go into that. So after that, you had a situation where the people in what were then officially known as the southern governorates, i.e. the area of the previous of the PDRY, were gradually alienated and more so. And by 2007, you started having an actual separatist movement, particularly since many of the military, for example, were dismissed after 1994. And the divisions and the increased poverty and the increased divisions that built up in the 90s and the 2000s were getting more important. So after 2007, you had a Southern separatist movement. Now, in a way, I'm wrong in saying you had a Southern separatist movement because you very promptly had numerous Southern separatist movements, which were very much divided and in disagreement with each other. And particularly, to come back briefly to Hadramaut is an area that really is very different, and its people had no wish to be ruled by the people who were in control of the Southern separatist movement in the more western areas. And out of this, eventually, one of the movements that's emerged out of there is known as the Southern Transitional Council. Now, the reason that movement has become the dominant movement, at least in international politics, is as a result of very massive diplomatic, financial, and military support from the United Arab Emirates. And it's very important to note that if you look back at the very important internal conflict in the PDRY in 1986, the divisions were between two groups based in one in very far west of the PDRY and one far west of Aden, north and west Lahej and Dalia areas, and the other one in Abyan and Shabwa. And that division still exists when you look inside the southern separatist movements. So the STC its main asset, other than the massive support it's getting from the United Arab Emirates, is the fact that it controls Aden, which is, as I said earlier, supposed to be the interim capital for the internationally recognized government. And because it's got that control, it enables it to basically subvert and prevent the internationally recognized government from operating as a proper government. So that's another fragmentation. So as I was saying earlier, you have Mareb with one governor who runs it his way. You have Tariq who runs ties his way, but then he's not even the governor. There's a governor as well. You have STC, which has a very strong control over Aden. And then when you move, and to some extent over the areas around it, and then when you move east, you start having, Shabwa, where there are further problems. Then you have Hadramaut. So basically, my view is that the STC represents a very small section of the former PDRY, or at least a very small number of the people in a small area of the ex-PDRY. There are many others, both within those governorates and elsewhere, who are either different separatists or believers in Yemeni unity, and that the STC is basically overblown thanks to this enormous diplomatic support it's been getting from the Emirates. I hope that's brief enough and not too confusing.
No, not at all. I think one more question I wanted to ask in this segment before I open up the discussion for the regional powers or the international powers, the international dimension of Yemen. Um, uh, does the politics in the South, that whether it's the STC or the others, still retain any of the progressive economic policies of the former PDRY? And if I could just add one more completely different question to you, can you talk a little bit about the economic policies of the Houthis? Because so far we have heard about the religious political aspect of the Houthis, and I'm still wondering because um, there are people who believe that even the theocracy in Iran, at least the Iranian Revolution as it stood at that moment, I don't know if you'd agree with that. There was a socialist component within that religious revolution. So I'm very curious about whether there is any progressive economic component within a culturally, let's say, for the lack of a better word, conservative Houthi movement. So two different questions here.
Okay, I'll start with the second one, then you'll have to repeat the first one. Basically, the answer is no. The Houthis economic policy is extract as much cash as you possibly can from any source that you possibly can in order to finance the war and also to finance some of the privileges for their top leadership. They don't export their money. Obviously, they do not have villas in Abu Dhabi or in Dubai for obvious reasons, but they're certainly building nice houses around Sana'a. And basically, the funds, the source of the funds is taxation, not only customs duties and import duties and all kinds of basically extracting money from traders, from everybody and anybody that you can extract any money from, including the humanitarian situation, etc. And that is used to finance the war and their privileged people. So, and they constantly claiming they don't have the funds to pay salaries for teachers and medical staff, but in fact they could pay for that if they wanted to, but they can make big celebrations on various occasions, etc. So no, I don't think you can say that you know, and they control the banks, which at the moment is an issue that's happening yet again with a USA foreign terrorist organization declaration. But the basic situation is that you don't have any. I wouldn't say you can say there's any progressive element in Houthi policies, and I wouldn't know. I mean, I have heard similar things about Iran, but I'm not sufficiently knowledgeable about the social policies of the Iranian regime and how they work out in practice to make any comment. When it comes to the Southern separatists, I mean, as I said, I find it incredibly ironic that they use the socialist flag because there is no sign of, again, there is no sign of socialism remaining in the way they behave or in the, I mean, they have no policies. Whenever they've been asked what their policies are for the future, they basically say independence and that's it. And they're quite incapable of saying anything else. And if you look at their leadership, they are basically, taking what they can for their own benefits, and they do have their villas in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Riyadh and wherever else. And that is coming from the funds that should be going to provide services to the Yemeni people. So, and again, that regime has fundamental financial problems because its resources are extremely low. and it used to live from the minimum oil exports, which were very minimal, but still they were there. But in 2022, when the truce ended in October, the Houthis basically attacked the oil exporting ports, and therefore oil exports have stopped. So the regime is extremely dependent on basically on financial support from the Saudis and the Emiratis and the international community. And again, here you have a rapidly dropping assistance in the humanitarian sector for something which is not specific to Yemen, but Yemen is one of the many countries that is suffering from the current international situation, and particularly the new policies of the Trump regime.
I think this is a good segue into the final segment that I wanted to discuss. Across the Middle East, it's impossible to ignore international relations. I mean, we are seeing this all over Syria now. Syria is the crossroad of all the international powers. The Israelis and the Turkeys are scrambling to occupy more land, more air bases. It's the United States, Russians are there. So I want to discuss Yemen and its crossroad in the international politics. A lot is talked about, as you mentioned earlier, about Houthis as Iranian proxy. Not a lot of people would say the PLC as a proxy of Saudi and UAE, even though that might be more correct. I don't know, or maybe not. Then there is the dimension of Palestine, which has become very sharp now. If you look at the protests, Palestine is predominantly there in the mobilizations within the Houthi areas. And then one could even go further and talk about Russia and Hezbollah being on the side of Houthis. Uh, I've thrown a lot at you, but if you can give us a much more concise and helpful way to look at how Yemen is navigating within these international crossroads.
Okay, well, I'll try and cover some of the territory. Whatever I forget, you can remind me with additional questions. I think I'll start with the Houthis and Palestine. Well, actually, no, I'll start with Yemen and Palestine. Yemenis are pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli. And I think you would have great difficulty to find a Yemeni who is not supportive of Palestine. So taking action in support of Palestine in the current genocide that's going on in Gaza is basically, I would say, normal instinct practically for any and every Yemeni. What it has also done, of course, is that the Houthis are the only entity of, I mean, whether they're recognized or not recognized, they are controlling a significant element of a kind of a state. And they are the only ones who are actively doing anything supporting Palestine and attempting to attack the Israelis. So that has massively increased their popularity, which was not very high, if not to say it was actually low. It has increased their popularity in the area that they govern and beyond. I mean, I'm not saying that people elsewhere want to be ruled by the Houthis. I think there's plenty of reasons why one doesn't want to be ruled by them. But at the same time, one has to give some respect to the fact that they are trying to do something. Whether what they're doing is the best thing to be done is something else that can be debated, and I'm not a strategist. But in terms of the popular reaction to Houthi actions is, within Yemen, everywhere in Yemen, and beyond, if you look at the rest of the peninsula, is, I think, generally very positive on the popular side. And I think it's worth noting that, for example, the Saudis have not said a single thing against what the Yemen about the Houthis' attempt to attack Israel, nor have they assisted in any way the U.S. in their activities, against the Houthis. I think that's primarily because of an awareness of the popularity and importance of the Palestinian issue throughout the Arab world. So I think that covers it. The other thing, of course, as I said earlier, is that it's given the Houthis fantastic facilities for recruitment. People were not that enthusiastic to join their army before, at least not that many people were, but now they are because they think they're going to be sent to Palestine. I mean, the reality is that they're likely to be sent to the fronts in Marib or Taiz, but they're joining in order to do something about Palestine. And if you look at the frustration that is felt, I think, throughout the world by people at the horrors of what's going on in Gaza today, it's easy to understand it. Whether it's politically the best action or the best solution is possibly debatable, but certainly that is something that is happening. So I think if you look at the Palestinian issue, I think that's really a summary of what can be said. I think if you start sticking with the Houthis, if we look at the role of Iran, there is no doubt that the Iranians have been helping the Houthis now for about 10 years. Their involvement has increased from being minimal to possibly being higher. And it's primarily in the supply of sophisticated elements for the Houthi weaponry, because the Houthi have developed a military industry in the past 10 or 15 years. And they have skilled people, so they're developing a lot of things. I mean, I think they still need highly sophisticated technical elements for their weaponry, and some of that is most likely coming from Iran. I'm not a military expert in any form or shape. So they are getting that support. The Iranians have supported them with oil, which has helped them economically. But I'm not at all sure that the Iranians were totally enthusiastic about the Houthi actions against Gaza. I mean, against Israel in Gaza. Basically, because, if you look at the way the Iranians have behaved, and again, I'm not an Iran expert either, but if you look at the way the Iranian regime has behaved in the last 18 months, it's not been a provocative effort. It's been, on the contrary, in my view, an effort to keep out of the crisis and to avoid being involved. And it's only every time that there's been absolutely massive provocation from the Israelis that they have responded in any way. So I am not at all convinced that they're enthusiastic about what the Houthis have done. But again, like everybody else, they certainly can't say that. So, they would probably encourage the Houthis to cool it. I honestly don't know, but I think that's important to note. That is, and it's absolutely wrong to call the Houthis Iranian proxies. They do their thing because of what they want to do. There are similarities. There are, ideological similarities, and there's certainly the Iranian model is played a role in the way the Houthis have developed their own ideology, but that does not make them proxies, and they don't take orders from Tehran. Nor do I think they take orders from anybody, except they think they take their orders from God. So I think that covers the Iranian thing. Now, when we look at the internationally recognized government and its relationship with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, it's a complex relationship. I mean, the Saudis Saudi created the coalition in 2015 to bring back this internationally recognized government to Sana'a and to legitimacy, and, carried out heavy bombing for many, many years until 2022. And, this was basically a failure. It did not achieve what was intended. In 2022, they replaced Hadi by this PLC. And I think one of the elements that's important, and I can't remember if I mentioned it last time we talked, but it's something I've been going on about for many years and which is now much more widely said, which is that there's a very distinct split between the Saudis and the Emiratis. And that to some extent, this rivalry between the two, it plays out most visibly in Yemen, but it's increasingly also playing out in other fields and in other sectors of both the economy and international relations of these two states. But in terms of supporting Yemen, what we have is a group of some of the PLC members are supported by the UAE and others are supported by the Saudis. and and they have been known to come to blows with each other, but not recently. But certainly the competition and the differences continue to be there. And at the moment, again, they are most visible in Hadramaut, as they have been now for a number of years. So again, I mean, I wouldn't, nor would I say that that the PLC are the proxies for the Saudis or the Emiratis. I think on the contrary, I think both the Saudis and the Emiratis consider them a major burden that they wish they could get rid of. And the Saudis were on the point of signing their agreement with the Houthis in 2023 when the Gaza crisis erupted. And if that hadn't erupted, I think that this agreement would have taken place, and that would have extracted the Saudis. Their main objective, I think, in Yemen today is basically to extract themselves from this crisis, and the current situation makes it more and more difficult. So to finish off, I think it's impossible with not to mention the role of the U.S., which is really, blatant. And with now they have with while in 2024 under the Biden administration there were a number of airstrikes, some of them jointly with the Brits, but some independently on against the Houthis, and in order to basically address the Red Sea situation. Now, since 15th of March, we've had daily attacks by the Americans, by the US, on Houthi positions or Houthi or what they believe to be Houthi sites. Incidentally, the Saudis, the Brits, the Americans are all bombing the same places again and again and again and again. I'm not a military expert, as I've said before, but it's not clear to me why hitting the same places yet again is going to solve anything unless they assume the Houthis will just bring stuff back to these locations as soon as they've stopped bombing. But the bombs that are been falling since 15th of March are bigger and stronger and more effective or more dangerous, whether effective is probably not the right word. And there have been complaints and mentions in the US both of the fact that they are not being effective and that they're not achieving what they want to achieve, and that they're incredibly expensive. I mean, they've apparently just the ammunition used has cost more than $200 million, and the cost of the operation, if you include staff and the aircraft carriers and the rest of it, is now estimated to be over 1 billion. So, and incidentally, in the last 4 weeks, the Houthis claim to have downed four of these MQ-9 drones, whatever they're called, which I've just checked the price of. Each one of these costs $30 million plus. At least that's what the US says, or what the manufacturers say. So, we're talking about an offensive that is extremely destructive, though it apparently, as far as has been announced, has not caused anywhere near like the amount of death and injuries that one would have expected. So either these haven't been announced or, they really are not causing that damage. How much damage it's actually causing to the Houthi military capacity, I wouldn't like to even begin to suggest because I don't understand these things. But it's also in this in relation to the overall Yemeni situation for the last year. I mean, already under the Biden administration, you had factions of the IRG that were asking the Brits and the Americans to give them more support and assistance to restart the ground war. And there is more and more talk that this might happen in coming weeks, um, and with or without with U.S. air cover to assist the IRG military factions to defeat the Houthis. Um, Time will tell, I think, is the only thing I can say about that, whether it happens or not.
Does Israel have any interest in seeing the Houthis defeated and the IRG taking control of Yemen instead?
I don't think I mean, the Israelis would not be interested in Yemen at all if it weren't for the fact that these missiles are sometimes coming near them. Admittedly, they have suffered, or at least, Port of Eilat has suffered, but in terms of the maritime and the Red Sea activities, the Egyptian government has suffered far more. It suffered something like $8 billion loss in terms of Suez Canal fees. So the Israelis, I think, are far too interested in areas that are immediately next door to them. And I think if it weren't for the attacks from the Houthis, they would have no interest. I think as it happens, yes, I mean, obviously, if a faction close to the Emirates ended up taking over, that would probably be convenient because of their good relations with the Emirates. But I would say that fundamentally, the Israelis don't have any deep interest in Yemen.
Are the Saudis any more motivated now to see the IRG taking full control of Yemen, or do they think that that battle is lost and some kind of negotiation along the lines of 2022 is the greater possibility?
I don't know, is the straight answer. I think the Saudis want out. They would, of course, prefer to have the IRG in control, but then that would also probably make a lot more demands from them financially and otherwise in the long run. Whereas, and the deal with the Houthis would also have cost them quite a lot of money because they would have, the deal included them paying for salaries and paying for a lot of reconstruction, which would have been called, rehabilitation or something. So I think they really just want to get out of this quagmire, and they probably deeply regret the fact that they can't sign their deal with the Houthis tomorrow. If they could, they probably would do. That's my opinion.
And in terms of political legitimacy, if at all, this bombing campaign has must have made the Houthis politically more acceptable among Yemenis.
Well, in the sense that worked in 2015 when the Saudis attacked them. And yes, they are claiming that, I mean, as you know, with their slogan, Israel and the US are the prime enemies. So they're very, they're in a way happy to be at war against them. But I think at the same time, if you look at the amount of damage that is
Right.
probably being caused and the widespread, I mean, admittedly, the US are striking the same old places, but they're also striking a few new places. And so that, factories and other things which are really further destroying what's left of the Yemeni economy. So I don't think that it's a situation where I mean, they claim to be happy to be fighting the US, but I suspect that they're not that happy about it because certainly, there's no way you can ignore the fact that Trump has very big and powerful bombs, and that he doesn't hesitate to use him and has zero concern or zero respect for human life or, any of the elements that most of us would consider part of civilized world.
My final question is a more abstract question. If you can answer quickly, I last time we discussed your book. I don't remember the exact title. I'm so sorry. Was it "Seeds of Socialism in at the Outpost"? Um,
Outpost of socialism in
yes,
the Arabian Peninsula or whatever.
yes. Outpost.
Yeah, no
Uh,
PDRY book. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I still gather from that book was is that you were very excited about a political project in Yemen in the 60s and the 70s. I'm just curious, given so much of time you have invested in the region, um, what strikes you when you even think about the future of Yemen, and where does one look at hope, given everything we have discussed is not very inspiring, to be a little bit reductive?
I think when I look at the situation in Yemen, I think the only thing I can talk about is just a sense of immense sadness and unhappiness at what the way things have turned out. And that's really, really, I don't want to go on about it because I'll just start weeping. It is just so horrifically sad that it doesn't compare with what's happening in Gaza, but it's still pretty, demoralizing. In the long run, I think the hope lies in development of community-based solidarity, community-based activities, which might, over a period of a generation, produce people able to be committed to the country and to their citizen colleagues and brothers and sisters, and try and have a political class which would be, or political groupings that are not as the self-serving, such as the current leaderships on all sides, and I can only see hope at building up things at very much at the village and local community level. That's the only place where I see any hope. And of course, I think the desperate need for a complete and total revision of the education system to deal with the 21st century, which, again, is something that even when you start, it will take 10 to 15 years before it achieves anything. But in the short term, I find it extremely difficult to do anything other than weep.
On that note of pessimism, that was Helen Lackner, a leading expert on Yemen. Miss Lackner, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. I hope that people find this useful.
Absolutely.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.